Hi Stephen, thanks for the footage. Just following on from our initial assessment, obviously working on pressure point 4 drill. I've sent you some images, or I will send you some images across relating to the changes that the drill is encouraging. What I wanted to do in this section of the follow-up lesson is focus a little bit more on where I want to go with you next in regards to the overall action, and just touch on a few little changes here from down the line. Previously we were talking about the sort of excessive changing of flex of the knees, the fact that the club was manipulated outside the line initially, partly because of the setup from face on, which we'll look at in a second or two. So club goes out a little bit too much, right arm bends a little bit too quick, knees change flex a little bit too fast. As we approach the top of the backswing, it was a little bit too far across the line. Again, we talked about, if memory serves me correctly, how the right leg straightening too fast pushes the trail hip behind you too quick, which starts to move the shaft more and more across the line as you get to P4. We talked about using the head cover under the lead arm, pressure point 4, how the trail knee should straighten incrementally. We're now seeing more of that, so the hands aren't coming up quite as quick. The club certainly doesn't go outside during the takeaway. Now, previously the club would go outside. Sometimes visually these changes don't look too huge, but previously the club was going out whilst the right leg was changing flex dramatically. Now, the changing flex of the right knee is providing some turning to the hips, which is producing a huge inward component. And despite that huge excessive inward component from P1 to P2, the club is still a little bit above the arc. So that suggests that the hand path is being manipulated excessively. If that trail knee didn't straighten as much as soon, and you maintain that same sort of rate of inward and upward with the hands from P1 to P2, you would be significantly higher with the hands and more outside with the club head. On this one, the knee now does not change flex as quickly, and the hands do not raise as quickly. The club certainly doesn't go outside initially there. It's tracing the arc nicely on the way back. Now as the right arm bends a little bit, starts to elevate the hands, touch above the plane line, but nothing major, nothing catastrophe. Nothing that's a catastrophe, should I say. So from there, everything's a little bit more incremental. The arms are sitting on the chest more. You're starting to use the body in a more appropriate manner. That right leg isn't straightening too much too soon. As a result, the shaft is a little bit less across the line at the top of the backswing if you do a line straight up from the butt of the grip. So you can see a significant improvement in the overall positioning of the club at that point. Just going to run these two swings through. Try and get you matched up. The swings aren't quite at the same speed. Looking a little bit more sequenced at that point. Move through the ball, starting to look a little bit tidier in regards to the sliding, the extending, the turning from P6 onwards. Head's not coming up off the wall as quick. Hands are tracing the arc better through the hip. In the main part, because you're using your body more effectively, courtesy of the pressure point 4 drill and the tweaks at setup that we've seen from face on. So I'm just going to flip it over to face on for you now and give you a little bit of information regarding that and the improvements that you've made. Just one quickie before I do that, I beg your pardon. What I want to do now is, during the drills, I want to spend some time continuing to work with the head cover under the lead arm. What I'd also like you to do is spend a little bit of time with the head cover under. Okay, so from face on, quite a marked change in regards to your setup. So centre of the arc is the lead shoulder. From there we form a radius. That radius, or the arc, has got a lowest point and where we hit the ball in relation to the lowest point of that arc will dictate the swing's direction coming into the golf ball. Now, the positioning of the ball plays a part in that, but so too does the positioning of the handle. Hitting the ball off the deck with the driver has started to encourage you to move the ball back and also keep the handle forward at setup. Hitting driver off the deck does not steepen your angle of attack, it will level out your angle of attack. So you could argue that if you were hitting up on it excessively, it would move it to a more level angle of attack, so therefore you could argue it's steepening it. But you cannot hit a driver off the ground successfully with a steep angle of attack, not unless you've got a tremendous amount of club head speed. So what it's actually doing is leveling out the angle of attack. What it's also doing is shifting the swing's direction from the left to the right. So at P1, the address plane line is in a completely different direction, much more conducive to having a club face that's closed or slightly close to the path, as opposed to being open to the path. Okay, so great changes at setup. What I'm going to do now is get rid of those lines and take you to the top of the backswing. Previously, the right leg would straighten too much too soon. Forward bend in the pelvis would be maintained a little bit too much, and the pivot had a certain look to it. Now, we're starting to pivot in a much more appropriate manner. We're starting to straighten the right leg more incrementally. The pelvis is not turning behind us as much. It's being able to extend. And as a result, when we get to the top of the backswing, we have a completely different appearance in regards to the overall structure here. You're now starting to use your spine to propel the left arm the distance it needs to travel to get the job done. What you're also doing is, instead of keeping the hips in the forward bend because this was straightening too much too soon, turning the hip behind you, you're starting to bring the pelvis out of its forward bend, so the pelvis is starting to extend whilst rotating. Previously the right leg was extending, but the pelvis was maintaining a significant amount of forward bend. You move through the ball now, certainly in transition. You're starting to tidy up. Because the sequencing of the down and up, so the jumping aspect of the golf swing, has to be timed more consistently when we're working with driver off the deck, as opposed to always having it on a T-peg. So it's starting to drive some really good changes. As I said before, I'd like to see you spend a little bit more time working on the drills that we've already discussed. I think it's good that you can see some changes, and I'll send you the stills across with this as well. I'd like you to spend some time with the head cover under the trail arm, not just under the lead arm. So alternate between the two, 5 minutes with one, 5 minutes with the other. So you're working on pressure point 4, lead arm against the torso, then pressure point 5, trail arm against the torso. On top of that, continued work with driver off the deck. At this point, it is more of the same that is required so that we can start to see these changes really bed in. I want you to also put a little bit more emphasis on keeping the arms straighter through the hit and stopping quicker through the hit. So I'd like you to feel like you're going to stop at around about sternum height